what's going on, y'all? T-Bob here.
And Jake as well.
And you're about to watch a little OTB LSU.
We're going to give you all the latest, greatest between LSU football, baseball, women's basketball, softball, and everything in between.
Bottom line, if you want to talk Tigers, keep it locked, subscribe, like it, and we hope you enjoy it. Shea, so a lot has been going on with LSU, though. A few official visits coming up or came this last week, and it feels like probably every weekend they got them lined up. I will say this. I am just blown away by the amount of logistics that actually go into an official nowadays. It is mind-blowing. But before we get there, LSU has camp today, 3 to 7. Did you see Brian Kelly doing the bag drills?
That was at the golden. That was at the women's golden.
Yeah, the Golden Spikes. Yeah.
Yes.
I guess I only saw a brief thing this morning of him maybe doing. It looked like he was doing some footwork drills.
Yeah,
so
some footwork
drills.
drills. He did footwork and then he hits a dummy. Give me a star rating based on what you saw out of Kelly.
Oh, I think he's a solid 4-star, right? Who's got are we talking about his actual what he did? He's got to know enough about the game to put himself
right.
a 4-star.
That's right.
Yeah. I don't know.
T-Bob's so hung up on these 5 stars today, Shea.
Bro,
He's talking about blue chip ratio.
You are way too defensive on blue chip ratio. It is not saying
That's all he's talking about, Shea, all
except
day.
The only thing blue chip ratio is saying is that X percentage of the roster were once ranked as 4 stars. That is all it is saying, full stop.
I've actually got an article that y'all will love. It's coming out tomorrow. And it's got a bit of blue chip ratio in it, but it's really about why Louisiana and LSU in particular, why they should take such advantage of Louisiana and comparing really the 3-star guys who develop out of Louisiana and go on to get drafted to the 3-star guys they take from outside the state, and then how often those guys leave compared to when the Louisiana guys will stay put. I think it just brings up an interesting element too, because the number of guys, and this doesn't spoil the story, there's a lot in the story, but the number of guys that LSU takes each year from Louisiana and ultimately then gets drafted doesn't match. It's lower than the number of Louisiana guys that get drafted. So I just feel like in this era, when not just the transfer portal era, but now you've got more intel than ever on kids. They're subscribed to all these different services that give them, all their combine measurements and everything, and you're getting them to camp, that you should be able to evaluate the state better than you ever did before. And if you do that, I think that there's actually more, like people talk so much about top-end talent, there's more 3-star talent that can be developed in Louisiana really than anywhere else. That's where LSU really has to put their foot down and say, hey, look, we're going to take this kid instead of going up to, wherever, Florida or the East Coast, and grabbing, whomever else that might be rated about the same.
Well, it kind of dovetails a little bit, Shea, with a piece that Brody did not long ago, where him and some members of The Athletic looked at that actually LSU is a bit of 3-star U, in terms of developing. We're not the best when it comes to the top line 5-star guys, but as a school, they've been very good at putting maybe lesser guys in the league. So it's interesting. You're saying there's a little more meat on the bone. Okay, I look forward to chewing it up when the piece drops. LSU has camp today, 3 to 7 p.m. Give us the rundown. What should LSU fans be on the lookout for?
Yeah, so last week was the first O-line, D-line camp. And these camps are when the coaches can actually get, in the only time, they can get hands-on with players in terms of coaching them, instruction, running them through drills, all of that. So it's a very important piece of the evaluation process. It gives you so much more than, what full game film or checking in on a spring practice does for you. But O-line, D-line was a week ago. They handed out a handful of new offers, a lot of new offers for future classes, kids that are juniors and sophomores, or will be, I should say. And then today is the first skills camp, or I should say elite camp. The big elite camp will be later this month on the 16th, 17th, I think it is. But today they'll have a lot of big names in. They'll have some quarterbacks in that are going to throw. We'll get to see, I think, some Louisiana skill guys that are always out there. You got to remember, these are the camps where DJ Chark pops up. And all you've done is talked about, Malachi Dupre and Trey Quinn and all these other kids who had really dominated, whether it was rankings or the production in the state. And a guy like Chark shows up and just falls out and gets an offer and ultimately becomes a really key piece to your program. So I always love watching these days unfold, because Louisiana is just one of those states where kids can come out of Central Louisiana, North Louisiana, different spots in South Louisiana where you knew who they were, you've seen a bit of their film, maybe their high school wasn't all that great, but boy, when you see them in person, it really elevates them to a new level, and boy, it can change some lives. I mean, kids go from no offers to picking up an LSU offer, and that's pretty big time. So I'm excited about tonight. We'll have a lot of coverage from that.
Hell yeah.
Shea, they had 3 official visits in this past weekend. You had a receiver, a DB, and an offensive lineman. Anything from those 3 players that maybe, is a good thing for LSU, or maybe you're not hearing as much about those 3 players?
Yeah, I'd start with Marcus Muscall, who is a Georgia offensive lineman who
imagine that.
Brad Davis got in on him early, and I'll say this, Brad Davis, who, he was with Sam Pittman for a bit. Coach O brought him down here. He's a Baton Rouge native. You look at the past couple of the line classes, and you feel very good about him. Like, I thought he did a great job last year. You get the 2 best in-state players. They're immediately starters for you at the 2 tackle spots. You went and got a guy in Georgia, 2 guys in Georgia, Paul Mabenga, but also DJ Chester, who a lot of big teams wanted, and they were able to win it out. So I really trust Brad Davis when it comes to evals and getting guys. And then if your head coach has to sign off on it, there probably aren't many head coaches out there who I feel as good about O-lineman as Brian Kelly, just because of what he's done at Notre Dame and how many guys went on to play in the NFL, and that weren't all 5-star guys. They got in and developed. So Mascall, when they offered him, I think he had like Georgia Tech and like maybe NC State. They offered. After that, Florida came in and some others, but he's down to Florida, LSU, NC State. He'll be at Florida this weekend, then NC State, then he'll have a decision. I like where LSU sits there, and I think he could be a pretty key piece. I think he's going to be a guy who continues to rise in the rankings just as more people get an eye on him. Joshua Lair was the safety, but at receiver, Jeremiah McClellan came in. He's from Missouri, St. Louis, and he's a big-time player, top 300 prospect, a 4-star, and it's a really interesting year for a receiver. And I say this all the time because Louisiana, not this about this year, but LSU in general, and I've said this on the show before, correct me if I'm wrong about who we'd have to think back on. If you think back on impact wide receivers at LSU, guys who even started, they were from out of state. I'd have to go back to Terrence Oliver, JoJo LaFell. Like, I can't name guys since then that were out of state that started it. I mean, it's always been Louisiana guys. And we see it right now. Brian Thomas, Kyron Lacey, Malik Neighbors, Chris Hilton, even those next guys up, they're all Louisiana guys. Now, this year's cycle in Louisiana, they only have 1 offer out, and it's Jacoby Young, who's uncommitted over at Holy Cross. I think maybe in the summer months we see that maybe they pull the trigger on another guy, maybe 2 here in Louisiana, but reality remains that if you don't feel like the state's giving you 3 or 4 no-doubt receivers, you got to go get them, and that means going into different parts of the country and swinging for the fences on guys like Jeremiah McClellan, who's down to really LSU and Ohio State. And Ohio State's just done a fabulous job recruiting receivers over the past, 5, 6, 7 years. So that will be an interesting battle to watch unfold, and really just receiver in general. I'm kind of curious to see how they come away because a year ago they took a couple in-state kids, Shelton Sampson and Kai Preon, but also went to Florida and got Jalen Brown. They went to Texas and got Kyle Parker. So you're having to do a little bit of kind of deeper digging outside the state at receiver than maybe you're used to if you're on LSU staff. And for me, it's just kind of an interesting storyline. It's just not ever had to track that much just because Louisiana produces wide receivers at a rate that really no other state does.
Shea, you mentioned O-line, D-line camp going down, and it seems like every year LSU and the offensive line is the more interesting conversation to have because it seems to be a position that Louisiana doesn't really produce, right? And I feel like you're actually in a really good spot right now. But what about the D-line? And the only reason I say it is because, look, this year with Mekhi Wingo and Mason Smith, you look like you should be pretty incredible on the interior. But that said, and even though, look, you've had a lot of guys. Like, there was an entire Athletic article yesterday, Jake, about Neil Farrell and how good he's been in Vegas and how much better he be. It's like there's been guys, but why is it, Shea? Is it just maybe the game has changed? Why is it that you don't feel like you have ever reached the kind of Saban-esque or Miles Prime heights that you used to when it looked like the whole defensive line was made up of NFL guys, a lot of which came from Louisiana?
Yeah, I mean, it's a case-by-case thing. There's no doubt when you look at the NFL draft stuff that Louisiana produces skilled players well over O-line, D-line, or even quarterback. These are positions often you have to go elsewhere to find. I'd say that the number one player in the state this year is Dominic McKinley at Acadiana. He's a 5-star. He's a defensive lineman. So for LSU, it starts there. And they've already got Ahmad Bro committed, who's a D-lineman out of Ruston. They went all the way to the state title in a great game with Destrehan. And he's a very good player. I saw him at camp this past week. And if he had not gotten offered and committed already, he would have been offered and pressed to commit then. I mean, he looks solid. So you've got some nice jumping off points. They've got Kalash Cobbins out of Destrehan committed as well. He's kind of an edge linebacker type. But I think for me on D-line right now, and I do agree, I think this year's D-line with the transfers they took as well, they're really deep. That won't be an issue at all for them. And they're really good at that starting for, like Savion Jones, Quincy Wiggins. Those are guys who I think we're going to start to hear more and more about. And we know what Mason Smith and Mekhi Wingo can do. I just point to, and you guys know this because you're recruits, it's tough to win battles in recruiting when you're working on a very short clock as a coach. And what I mean by that, I guess, is LSU's had 3 D-line coaches in 3 years.
Yeah,
I mean, it was the Orgeron era, then you go to Jamar Cain, now you're on Jimmy Lindsey. So when you're hitting the reset button with who's recruiting you, every 12 months, and that's kind of the streak they've been on here for a few years, it makes it tough. Now, Jamar Cain came from Oklahoma, so he had the benefit of being able to recruit a couple of guys out there that he had been recruiting at Oklahoma. Jimmy Lindsey comes from South Carolina, and he had recruited some guys who were similar to LSU, but I'm sure Jimmy Lindsey will tell you, okay, well, the expectations are raised now. Like, I'm not after the same guys at South Carolina that I'd be after at LSU. And then you've got to kind of start over, really, in terms of building board and going after guys, and it almost takes a year to get settled in. Yeah. So that's one position I think that's going to be interesting to watch, because I think people wanted a little more from last year's D-line class, and now you're sitting there, kind of wondering, hey, can we make up for that? Can we have an even better D-line class this year, while also knowing that we've had 3 D-line coaches in 3 years, and what that means for recruiting and the hurdles you have to overcome because of it.
That's a really good point, Shea, something I hadn't even thought about, because a lot of times in high school recruiting that we talk about over the transfer portal is you've recruited that high school player for 2 years. You've talked to the assistant principal, you've talked to the janitor, you've talked to everybody to get to know who that young man is, and you have a relationship. I can tell you, I've got relationships with coaches that I obviously didn't sign with that just recruited me for 2 years, and we have a relationship and still talk 20-something years later. So there certainly is something to that, because in the transfer portal, you have 48 hours sometimes to decide if you want to play or not. So if you don't have consistency, and sometimes you can't help it, maybe you do lose a little bit of that.
Yeah, that's one thing I think about the portal, and some college coaches have brought this up to me, is they're spending a lot of time right now recruiting guys that they haven't offered. Let's say in Louisiana, they haven't offered them. And if I'd say, Coach, what's the percentage chance that kid ends up in the class? It might be under 30%. It might be under 20%. But, Jake, what happens in 3 years when that kid hits the portal from another school and says, man, you never showed me any love. You never talked to me. You didn't even drop by my high school whenever I was coming out. Or is it, oh, you were all over me. You had me at camp. You brought me in on visits. You let me come on OVs. Y'all didn't offer. Y'all had other kids on the board, but I know y'all. I don't. And as you said, Jake, maybe you've got a week to decide. If you're talking about going back home and playing at LSU and they dial you up, is it a cold call, or is it, hey, it's us? We recruited you hard coming out of high school. We weren't able to offer, but we want you now. So it's almost like building relationships is more important than ever, because so much of a program now is going to be built on the portal. And a lot of that is, are you starting fresh with a kid who's got a week to decide, or did you already put in a number of years of work with him, even if you didn't go to your school?
Yeah.
I mean, that is truly awful. I mean, so at a time when coaches already don't have any time left whatsoever, you now have to recruit kids that you're not going to get on the off chance that they may hit the portal in a couple of years.
Does coaching in the NFL sound good right now?
I mean, bro, are you kidding me? Give me to the league ASAP. There's a reason why LSU's rolling through so many defensive line coaches. Shea Dixon, at Shea Dixon on Twitter, superior influencer, also covers recruiting in the LSU beat for On 3. Go follow Bengal Tiger on 3. Him and Billy Embody doing some excellent work over there. But you already know Shea, man, if you're listening to this show. So, Shea, thank you so much, man. And I look forward to reading the new piece. So let us know when it drops.
Yes, tomorrow. And superior influencer sounds like I'm a really great influencer, which would be so far from the truth. It's one of those you got to know type lines.
Wow, Jake, what incredible takes.
I mean, those guys, they're just the best.
I think so. And if you think so, again, hit the like button, subscribe, ring the bell so you get notifications when we post every single day here on OTB LSU.